Good evening and welcome to Bleak, a true crime podcast where the outlook isn't so good. We're your hosts, Laura and Amanda, two sisters from the same mister, and mom too.
And Mrs. too.
And Mrs. too. Yeah. Well, I mean, they're divorced, but they're still the same.
Yes.
We're still from the same couple, which
We are not half
we're
siblings.
we are not half siblings, but we have half siblings.
Yes.
And step siblings too.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyways, tonight we are covering the case of Sasha Krause, 27-year-old female from the murder, or she was living at the time in Farmington, New Mexico. This is a more recent case. And giving our case notes tonight will be Amanda. Take it away. Yay!
All right. Hello. So, as Laura mentioned, this case actually happened in 2020, so super recent. One of the reasons I really wanted to cover this case is because, other than seeing a documentary on this case, I have not heard any other podcasts cover it. That's not to say that none have. I just have not come across any. And I have not seen any other, like, 2020, 48 Hours, Dateline cover it other than the People magazine Investigates. So, and I watch a lot of true crime stuff.
We both do.
And
yes.
so I wanted to do something that, maybe people hadn't heard about. And so this seemed like a very fitting case. And the victim was very young, which is always extra horrible. So I'm just going to jump right into it here. Sasha Krause was 27 years old at the time of her murder. She was living in a small community in Farmington, New Mexico. She actually was originally born in a small town in Texas. She came from there were 6 siblings in her family, including her. By all accounts, they were a very close family. Sasha, just some of her interests she loved. She was a writer. She actually wrote music and hymns, and she
So they were pretty religious.
Very religious.
I would imagine.
And she was actually born into a Mennonite family, and being a Mennonite is something that comes up in this case a lot. And it's so I'll get into what I know about Mennonites and how that plays into this particular case a little bit later. So at the time of her disappearance and murder, she was living on this lamp and light community in Farmington, New Mexico. Now I'm just going to say this now. There is a strip club in St. Paul called the Lamplighter.
The Lamplighter. Oh yeah, right on Lexington. Yeah.
Every time when I first was listening to the research for this case and things like that, every time I heard lamp and light, all I could imagine was this woman in like religious garb with like a bonnet, like dancing as a stripper.
Stripping because of the Lamplighter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you we live in Minnesota, but if you aren't familiar with Minnesota, we just happen to have a random strip club in St. Paul, and
Yeah.
it's just one of those things that I think people that live in that area just knew of it because it was in a very populated area.
It was.
So anyway,
you just kind of always knew it was there.
Yes. So just know that as I'm talking, every time I say the word lamp and light, I'm imagining a stripper. So anyhow, sorry if that was inappropriate. So back to Sasha. Living on the lamp and light compound, she was not a stripper. She was actually a publisher, or she worked in the publishing house on the compound. She spoke 3 languages, and she would actually translate religious texts. So she was very smart.
Yeah, very bright young girl, it sounds
Right. And just by all accounts, she was very sure of herself and her decisions, and like not like a lost soul or anything like that. Very, was happy with where her life was and all of that. So a couple things about the Mennonites. Unlike Amish people, because I think a lot of people, when they hear Mennonites, they probably think of similarities to Amish people.
Right. Yeah.
They actually create their own rules when it comes to their interactions with modern life.
Right.
So, for example, Sasha had a car and a cell phone,
Right.
which Amish people typically do not, as far as I know.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't think so.
And so that was, but yet they'd have other strict rules. And sometimes it didn't really, this is not a criticism of them, but it didn't really make sense. Like you could have a car and a cell phone, but then, they have this hierarchy of God, Jesus, man, woman. So,
well, yeah.
as a woman in the Mennonite community, like you're the low man on the totem pole, kind
Right,
of, essentially.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
that was just how, that was their ideology. That's what, whatever you think about that, that is what their hierarchy is. So another thing about Mennonites is they do not join the military, typically. Not typically, they don't at all.
Right, because I think they're kind of they're pacifists.
Pacifists.
They're pacifists.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
They do not become police officers, and they are considered non-resistant, meaning they believe whatever was meant to happen is God's will. So if I am going to attack you and try to get your wallet,
I'm just gonna be like, okay.
yes, you're not
Go for
gonna
it.
pull out a weapon and try to fight that person off. They're not going to
Wow. I
even
cannot imagine.
try to say, no, you can't have my wallet. They're literally just they're saying, you know what, God wanted it to go this way. And actually, Laura and I were talking about this prior to the podcast a little bit, and again, this is not a criticism of Mennonites, because that's not why we're here, but our question is, isn't it God's will if you resist and then the person ends up, you fight them off? Like, wouldn't
Right.
that be God's will as well?
That became God's will,
And-
because you had it in you to fight this person off.
Yes.
And you got away or you survived. Now, wouldn't that also be God's will?
And I think it's problematic to make it known that you are a non-resistant entity, because that could put a target on your back.
Right.
If I can attack a Mennonite and they're not going to do anything, that's
Right.
could be very
And
problematic.
due to their dress, the bonnet, the whole deal, they kind of stick out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
in society a little bit.
Yes. So, at the time of this crime, Sasha had been living on the compound for 18 months. So, by all accounts, she fit right in on the compound. She didn't have, major issues, really, with anybody. She loved living there. She, had her duties at the publishing house, and then she would attend services several nights a week and provide the music, and that she kind of just had her routine, and she was enjoying her life. Had no reason that she wouldn't want to be there.
Right.
So I'm gonna kind of skip to where they notice that she's not there, essentially. So Sasha lived on the compound in what they would maybe refer to as a dorm.
Right.
Within the compound, and she had 2 roommates, so it sounded like it maybe a small apartment where they each had their own bedroom, but there was a communal bathroom,
Right.
and then I think maybe there was a communal kitchen on another site,
Right.
where
That's what
everybody went to. That was kind of my impression.
Yeah.
And so she had 2 roommates, Lily and Lucinda, and they were also in their 20s, like she was.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived in a building called the Lighthouse Building.
With a really strict curfew, by the way.
Yes, that does come up as well. So at 1 o'clock in the morning...
Different for a 27-year-old, just saying.
Yes, for sure. At 1 a.m., Lucinda wakes up. So it isn't so they have this 10 p.m. curfew, as Laura just mentioned. It isn't like they have to check in at 10 p.m.
Right.
But people also on that compound were not breaking curfew. Like, that's just not something they ever did.
No,
They
it was,
were,
and that was something set up, I think, by, well, didn't they say the church elders?
yeah, or, you know,
Didn't
they
the
could make
church,
their own rules. So I don't know
right?
if that was just specific to that compound or something all
Yeah, I don't know.
Mennonites do.
Yeah.
That was, I don't know. But that was the case on this particular
Okay.
one.
Perfect.
So Lucinda wakes up at 1 a.m. She notices that Sasha's door is ajar and her room light is on, which, again, I don't think they're up at 1 a.m., you know, doing things on a regular basis. So Lucinda thought this was odd. And
Yeah.
she ventures into her room. I think she had gotten up to use the restroom or something. And she goes into her room and notices Sasha's not there. And this, in and of itself, was extremely alarming because Sasha had lived there 18 months. She's never broken curfew before.
Right.
And so initially she's like, okay, let's look around the dorm, I'm just going to call it that, to see if she's anywhere else within the dorm, and she was not. And so the first thing Lucinda does is she calls Sasha's phone, and it goes straight to voicemail, which is odd. And but apparently she was not, even at night she didn't turn her phone off. So
Oh, okay.
that was unusual for her. And
Well, yeah, she had family living in Texas.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at that point, because she's a woman in the
Yeah.
Mennonite community, she isn't going to decide the course of action. She's going to get a community elder,
Man.
somebody, a man, exactly, a man, to
Right.
tell her what needs to happen. So she ended up calling, it was a man who was Sasha's boss at the publishing company, who also lived on the compound, told him what was going on. The first thing they did was check to see if her car was there, and it was. Her vehicle was still there. So that's odd because she's gone. So I think their first initial thought was maybe she got hurt and
Right.
is off somewhere, you know, like broke her leg and she can't get help.
Right.
So they just did a quick search of the compound, and she's just nowhere to be found.
So there'd be very few scenarios that would prevent her from making her curfew.
right,
Very few.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think they knew something was very odd going on, like from the get go. So they did place a 911 call within that first hour that they noticed she was missing. So at this point, we're talking maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, and they reported Sasha missing, and the police did respond quickly, and I have no criticism really of the police in this particular case.
Right.
Just for future reference, if I think the police did a terrible job, I'm gonna say that.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
if they do a great job and deserve praise, I'm also going to
Yes.
say that
absolutely.
as well.
Yep.
So
credit. You know,
What credit's due,
credit
yes.
lies where credit's due. Yep.
So this particular case, they did well. I think they, you know, sometimes in these cases they say, "Oh, well, she just ran away." I think it sounded like they knew something was really wrong because she was willingly living on that compound. Her car was there, and just there were no indications that she would have just left.
Right. Well, another thing too is that because they were so close to the compound, the police were in the same community as the compound. They were super familiar with
Right.
Mennonites,
Yes,
and their
they
beliefs.
were.
Yeah, so that gave them, they knew off the bat, like
Yes.
the Mennonite. I mean, they would make their curfew like that.
Yeah, and how big of a deal that actually
Right,
was,
right.
right? So the police were baffled because they did, the first thing they did was search her car, and thinking, you know, maybe they'd find blood or something, and nothing appeared to be out of sorts in her vehicle. They didn't find anything unusual. So the first thing they do is they start interviewing people that she knew, fellow Mennonites, because that's
Right.
how an investigation typically starts.
Makes sense.
They
Yeah.
start with the people closest to you. So the one thing that stood out was apparently Lucinda, her roommate, and Sasha both had a crush on this man named Stan, who was also like a 20-something-year-old man. Now, I can
Mennonite.
imagine. Yes, I can imagine that there aren't a ton of eligible bachelors within
No.
like in your age range within the
Right.
Mennonite community. It's probably, at first thought you're like, oh well, this could have been a love triangle. But the more you think about it, it's like, well, the the idea that two women would like the same man when your pickings are very slim,
Right.
it probably happens.
Oh,
I
I'm
mean,
sure it
I
does.
can't imagine that
I'm
that
sure it does. And even though they're Mennonites, they're human. There's jealousy. I mean,
right.
you know.
And so Lucinda, in her interviews with police, the the police officers they interviewed on one of the documentaries I watched said she did appear to be hiding something. Lucinda did, and she did admit that the relationship she had with Sasha was difficult at
Right.
times. But Lucinda agreed to have her DNA taken, and they really had nothing to hold her on, so she was,
Like,
free to
oh,
go.
yeah.
And then they obviously did notify her family in Texas that she was missing at this point. And her family in Texas, said, hey, we know of nobody that, no enemies. She was well respected. And so they were really like, had no clue what to think of what was going on.
Right.
Um,
Did the parents travel up? Do you know?
I believe they did, but they didn't really.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
couldn't find a lot of information on that. Um, so the San Juan County Sheriff's Office ended up starting like a major investigation with a canine unit, and at one point there was like a random Jeep in the area that they stopped, and it was just like a guy that nobody really knew who he was, and he said, well, I'm just helping finding that lady, and they kind of thought that was a little weird, but nothing ended up coming of that. And then another thing that came up was above the compound there was like a almost like a hill that other
Oh.
people lived on that they could actually kind of see into the compound.
Ooh.
And it was this family called the Lappings that
Oh.
lived on this hill. And some of the Mennonite women were complaining that the Lappings would actually be like looking at them with binoculars.
Well, that's
Concerning.
concerning. Yeah, you're thinking, could it
And
be
that
the
they're
lapping?
right. And then they're also putting up cameras
Jeez. Oh.
to like videotape them, and they're like, well,
They
this
sound-
is strange.
They sound a little creepy.
Yeah.
Little creepy.
So the Lappings are like,
and
we just have these cameras up because we're tracking animals.
And oh.
And people are like, yeah, okay, that's bizarre. But they actually, they investigated the Lappings, and they actually were telling the truth that
Oh.
on these cameras, 'cause they allowed them to watch the camera footage,
Yeah.
they really were tracking animals. So
Okay, well,
they,
good for the lappings, but strange, still odd.
yes, something to
Odd.
look into for
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
And then another suspect early on, before, while she was still just a missing persons, was this man named Samuel Kuhn, who
Okay.
was a coworker of hers at the publishing company. And he actually stopped by the compound on the day Sasha went missing, around the same time Sasha was last seen. So Sasha had been seen sometime in the late afternoon. She had stopped by I think it was the library or one of the buildings to get some music that she had written to bring to a service like on the following day.
Okay.
That was the last time anybody had seen her, and apparently this Samuel Kuhn coincidentally happened to be stopping by the compound right around that time. And they thought, it was a little suspicious
Was he a
because
Mennonite?
I believe he was. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And apparently, like, his story changed a little bit. Like, the first time he said he talked with police, he said he went through one entrance, and then the next time he talked to the police, he said a different entrance. And of course, they're looking for inconsistent statements.
Right.
Although I do think witnesses can tell inconsistent stories and still be telling the truth because people's recall can be really bad.
Yes.
But
Yes.
that's still something that they look for.
Right.
And he had been with his wife, so of course,
Oh.
and he had mentioned stopping at the gas station. So they checked gas station surveillance, and he was on surveillance, but his wife could not be seen in the vehicle at the gas station.
Oh.
Now, I wasn't clear whether they could see that she wasn't in the vehicle or if they just couldn't tell.
Oh. Okay. If he was lying or not.
Yeah, because
about
why,
that?
if you're totally innocent, why would you lie about that?
You wouldn't.
So
You-
I
you
think it was
wouldn't.
just that they couldn't see whether she was there or not.
Because it was dark or whatever. Okay.
So at that point, they can't completely eliminate Samuel. He did refuse a polygraph, which let me tell you, I personally would probably refuse a polygraph no matter what.
And I'm one who thinks that it makes you look guilty.
To refuse it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
I guess
I feel
because there are people though that fail them that are telling the truth,
right.
and the
They're
lawyers
not 100%.
lawyers tell people not to take them ever.
I know. I don't know.
So
I feel like if I didn't do something, I'm gonna pass.
Right. Well, I take a medication called metoprolol, which
Sure.
actually slows down your heart rate. So
Okay. Yeah.
that can have an effect as well.
Right. That
Which
makes
obviously
sense.
that doesn't apply to most people, but there can be psychopaths who can pass them because
yeah.
they're a psychopath.
They're not foolproof. That's the
No.
thing. And so, but to refuse it outright, be like, nope. It just, I mean, there's that percent of guilt you are automatically going to.
But they are not admissible in court.
Right.
So
Right.
anyhow, this
Okay.
particular person refused it.
Right.
I think we could go on about that probably for a while.
Yeah.
But I don't think it you can refuse it and be innocent.
And it's legal to
And
refuse.
vice versa.
It's legal to refuse it.
Yes.
Yeah, you can do that.
Samuel also helped search for Sasha, and this lead eventually ends up going really nowhere.
Right.
So a month passes, and there's just nothing new is coming up. And then, just when they think, this case is going to be a cold case, on February 21st, 2020, so this was about a month after her disappearance, 260 miles away in a town near Flagstaff, Arizona, a woman's body was found by a camper she was camping in this very rural area. Remote area. Yes, that's what I meant to say. And she was looking for firewood, and she happens across a woman's body.
Right.
And she was extremely upset, as anybody would be.
Yeah.
The body, actually, of this woman was in very good condition because now we're talking about February. Even though it's Arizona, it still gets cold in certain areas.
Right.
So the body of this person had been relatively preserved because of the cold conditions.
Right.
And it actually, this person's body was under a sagebrush that kept her body out of the sun. So because of those two factors, it wasn't like they had this decomposed body that they couldn't get any information from.
Right.
It was actually very well preserved. So this woman called the police. She was very upset, and the police obviously responded, and it was a woman dressed in Mennonite garb. She was, and also had like a zip-up hoodie jacket on, and had a bonnet on, and it, of course, was Sasha Krause. And she was actually laying on her, what do we call that, on her stomach, essentially. So they couldn't tell until they flipped her over that her hands were bound with duct tape. And so that's an ominous sign. That's not a natural death. And one thing I found was odd is they talked about her fingerprint. They identified her through fingerprints. But I'm like, why would her fingerprints be on file?
That is interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that I never got like an explanation for that.
Could it be like, I'm trying to think like those, how they, at those fairs and stuff, they have those kid fingerprint things. Do they keep those on file? I mean, I'm just trying to think of, or was she an employee somewhere where she needed her fingerprints on file?
That's the only thing I can think of.
Like a bank, or at some point had she
in
been
her life.
employed?
Yeah, I mean I couldn't find any other information on that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, why were her fingerprints on file as a Mennonite?
Right, and also, I
what
mean, how
scenario?
many missing women are there that are going to be dressed that way? I mean,
right, not too many.
but they still have to formally identify her
right,
regardless.
of course.
So
Could be some kind of costume party, or or anything. But you know what I mean? Like,
do you want to be a Mennonite for Halloween, Laura?
No,
Not this year.
but not this year. But maybe some year. I don't know.
So, of course, her family was notified. They were devastated. They held a funeral for her. There were, like, literally hundreds and hundreds of people. They played music that she had written. It was very,
touching.
very nice funeral from all accounts. And so then, of course, they did an autopsy on her body, and she had no defensive wounds whatsoever. So that kind of backs up the fact that she followed her. To me, even if you really truly are
Resistant.
so religious and really believe, to me it's like when you get into that situation with like adrenaline,
Right.
you'd think maybe there are going to be people that resist. Do you know what I mean?
If you're being hurt, how I don't understand how you can resist. Like, you're being, whatever's happening to you, you're being stabbed, you're being shot. How can you just resist that?
Right. Some
I
of it
don't-
is almost like involuntary.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So, but she apparently
Her hands were bound too.
her hands were bound, and so she didn't resist the binding. I don't think,
Right.
Because there was nothing to indicate
She
that.
wasn't scratching at him or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no DNA found at the scene.
Right.
So either the assailant wore gloves, or that was the most likely. So that kind of shows an element of planning.
Right. Right. They were
um,
wearing some kind of gloves or protective.
Right.
gear.
And she did have a gunshot wound to the back of the head from a .22 caliber
So that was quick.
rifle.
That was a quick.
So yeah, so I mean there maybe wasn't much of a scuffle
Right.
given the fact that she was shot.
Right.
And no sexual assault, so it didn't seem like
wow.
a sexual motive, which I was a little surprised because when you think of, I always, for some odd reason, you think of like somebody with some kind of weird perversion that like was like, oh, I want to assault this Mennonite lady, you know, which is terrible.
It's awful. It's an
Yes.
awful thing, but could that have occurred? Well, not if there wasn't a sexual assault.
Right.
So then it makes you start wondering, was this from inside of the community, but then they're not violent? I mean, wow.
Yeah, and then they've already interviewed many people
Right.
from and nobody has.
Because it's been a month. Okay.
So, now, this is one of the parts of the case that I think is, like, fascinating. I've never heard of another case having this exact... You'll see what in a minute here. But when of course, they're going to analyze her cell phone data. That's one of the first things they do. Her
Always.
cell phone
Yeah.
was not on her body, and it's never been found even to this day.
Really?
No. But, so the San Juan County Sheriff's Office has a geolocation data forensic analyst named Sev, S-E-V, Dishman.
Oh.
And I'm sure most sheriff offices have something like this, but he seemed like, I don't know if they've just gotten better at this over the years because it's so recent, but he really ends up being the one to really crack this case. So they analyzed months of data leading up to the time when her phone essentially died. So at
Okay.
7:32 p.m., her phone is pinging off of a tower at the Lamp and Light compound.
Right.
So at this point, they know that's like the last time her phone is in that area.
Right.
Assuming her phone is on her, which it was,
Right.
as far as they know. The next time is 9:30 p.m., so 2 hours later, her phone's pinging off a tower near the Four Corners which is it's where Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and maybe Colorado.
Arizona? No.
I said
Oh,
Arizona.
sorry.
Anyhow,
Arizona.
it's where 4 states.
Colorado, you're right.
Yeah,
I
4
think it's
states
Colorado,
essentially meet up
into
into one area.
place.
So
Pretty cool.
that the phone pings off of there, and then it eventually pings off of a third site, which is the location where her body was found.
Right, which
So-
kind of makes sense. So it's traveling.
Right.
Like, where she's going. Okay.
So they did check Samuel Coons, the man that we talked about earlier from that stopped by the compound, against to see if his phone records coincided with what the data they got, and he had no
Right.
connection. So he can pretty much be eliminated at this point.
Okay.
So what this, and I think this is brilliant, what this analyst decides to do is he says, okay, well, I'm going to get search warrants for all the providers, because we don't know what provider that the assailant had.
Right.
So they get, and I didn't even know they could do this, but they get, so like they're like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and they say, okay, can you give me the cell phone data from any device? So they don't know which device.
Or whose it is.
Because normally they're like, okay, I've got Billy Bob's, he's a suspect, let's check his cell phone.
Right.
And they get a search warrant for Billy Bob's specific device through his carrier.
Right.
But in this case, they didn't have that information. Like, the suspect is unknown.
Right.
So they get search warrants for all the different, the AT&T, all the different providers.
Right.
For anybody else's device that pinged off of those 3 locations where Sasha's phone pinged off of.
In the same time period?
At the same time period.
Okay. Okay.
So they're talking about the
I
Lamp
didn't
and
know
Light
they could do that.
compound.
Wow.
And maybe this is a newer thing. I've personally never heard of a case where they
No.
use this particular way of solving. But again, this is a recent case.
Well, and it was a rural, remote area, and so it would work better.
Right. Now,
than if
yeah,
you're
exactly.
in the city.
If you're in the
well,
city, there might be hundreds of thousands.
300 or 1,000 suspects.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That definitely was helpful that it was so remote, and so after it took a long time. It took weeks, if not months, to get this information back. But when they did, there was only one other cell phone that pinged off of those same same sites as Sasha's phone,
Yeah.
and
Ooh, not looking
So
good for whoever that was.
it almost reminded me of like a reverse genealogy search.
right,
except with
which
a
I
cell
do find
phone.
fascinating. Yeah,
Yes.
and that is very close to how that
So,
would work. Yes.
They found that the owner of that cell phone was identified as a man named Mark Gooch.
Mark Gooch. Ooh.
Now, it took me a while to say that name.
I used to have a cat named Goonch. And so, yeah.
So
No,
Mark
his name is
Gooch, not
Gooch.
Mark Taint, Mark Gooch. Such a terrible name.
It
But you know
is.
what? This guy is a gooch. He
Yeah,
really
he
is.
is a
He's a
gooch.
scumbag.
Yeah, just a jerk.
Spoiler alert, Mark Gooch is not a great guy. So he actually didn't really have like a criminal record. They said, I read that he didn't have a criminal record, but then in the documentary I watched that I also found credible because it was through People magazine, they said he didn't have a significant criminal history. And it sounded like he, as a teenager, was involved with, like, he was troubled,
Right.
rebellious. He was involved in some theft, some burglary. I don't know if that actually meant, like, breaking into people's houses, but
Right.
he wasn't, like, in some of the articles you read, they're like, well, there was just nothing to indicate he would ever be involved in something like this. And while it's true he did not have a violent background,
Right.
he was considered a troubled youth.
Sure.
So it's not quite. He's not
as
innocent
scot free or
as they're trying to say.
yeah.
So so of course they can't just immediately go and arrest him. They have
No,
to
you have to have evidence.
get some information, evidence, some
Right.
corroborating evidence.
Other than just the cell phone data, I
Right.
suppose. Yeah.
So they just started off by, okay, what is this guy? Where does he work? How old is he?
Right.
He was only 21 years old, so this is a young man.
So he's far younger than the murder victim.
Well, she was 27.
Well, I know, but
yeah,
yeah, he's quite a bit younger for a young adult. That's,
right.
That's a significant age difference.
He was an airman in the Air Force at that time. He worked in equipment maintenance. He was stationed in the Phoenix, Arizona area.
Okay.
And like I had said, his criminal history is described as insignificant.
Okay.
He was raised, they find out he was actually raised in Wisconsin. Now, something that kind of triggered a little alarm bell was that he was raised in a Mennonite community in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So that's a strange connection. They're
How
both
could he-
Mennonites, but they have no, as far as anybody can tell, Sasha and Mark Gooch do not know each other.
So he was okay.
So,
But that makes you think, did they... Well, they're 6 years apart, though. Huh, okay.
so investigators went to Wisconsin to speak with his family and known contacts.
Right.
And that's when they found out about his history of theft, vandalizing property. He was actually suspected but not charged in burglaries. So
Okay.
that's... but they did say, and this is something that a lot of different people that knew him said, that he developed a bitterness towards Mennonites, but nobody knew why. So there was never like, oh, he had been abused by a Mennonite elder, or he had had a traumatic experience, or this or that happened. It was just a generalized disdain for Mennonites.
Well, okay, so you mentioned that he was in the Army, or the Air Force, yet Mennonites can't be
Right.
in the Air Force.
Yes. So he was not.
I'm not
He
understanding
was
this.
no longer in the Mennonite community. He had left and was no longer practicing that religion.
Okay.
So-
do they know when he left, like as an adult or as?
I really couldn't find anything on when he had
So probably
left.
as an adult, probably
I
fresh
thi- I
out
mean,
of high school or
Yeah,
something.
it seemed like he knew from early on. In something later on, his dad, Mark Gooch's dad, mentioned that his heart was never in it
Right.
as a Mennonite. So for whatever reason, it just never was something he...
He wasn't never gonna continue on.
No.
Like it was not his thing.
So they ended up getting security footage from the base that Mark Gooch was stationed on, and for the day of Sasha's kidnapping. And at 9:04 a.m., he left the Air Force Base in Phoenix and headed north. And at 4:14 p.m., so he had been driving essentially pretty much that whole time, Mark Gooch's phone pings off a tower just outside the Lamp and Light compound.
Right.
And so that's consistent with, they can see he leaves his Air Force base in the morning, and they can see that there's no security footage, but they can see based on his phone, he's at this Lamp and Light compound.
Right.
Then his phone remains at that location for 3 hours, so he's assumingly probably watching somebody, watching Sasha, or looking for a victim.
Right.
And then at 8:54 p.m., his phone pings off a tower to the west, essentially the same tower where Sasha's phone's pinging off. So he's starting at the time he leaves the Lamp and Light compound. He and Sasha's phones are in sync,
Okay.
essentially.
So I mean, good chance it was him.
Right.
I mean, let's be real.
And then with this background of not liking Mennonites, so at 1 a.m., his phone pings off of Sunset Crater where Sasha's body was found.
Right.
And then Gooch arrived back on base in Phoenix just before 7 a.m. on that following morning.
Okay.
And that's on video surveillance. So they know he was gone that entire night.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have this video surveillance in addition to the cell phone data. So that's some corroborating evidence.
Yeah.
And then 2 days after the murder of Sasha's murder, Gooch returned to Sunset Crater, and they think it was either to check her body to see if was still there,
Oh.
or to, maybe he was reliving some part of it. They don't really know, but they do know he returned to the site of her body, and clearly he didn't do anything.
Maybe he was putting the brush on. Maybe now he's a little more concerned someone's gonna find it.
That could be too.
Oh.
So they were like, well, we have a lot of evidence, but we still need to look. We need to get all angles here. So the next thing they did was get his credit card information. And it does show that Mark Gooch stopped for gas in Farmington on the day of Sasha's disappearance. So now you've got surveillance from his Air Force base, you have his cell phone data, and then now you have the credit card data showing he got gas there. Okay. Again, no evidence to indicate that Mark Gooch knew Sasha. So, of course, after they got this evidence, they called Mark Gooch in for questioning. And the detective asks him, do you have any idea why a detective would want to speak with you? To which Mark Gooch answers, the only thing I can think of is maybe I was going too fast on my bike.
Oh.
So.
On, like, his motorcycle, I would imagine? Okay.
That was the only thing he could think of,
That's
oddly.
the only reason. That's all I have
Not
done.
the fact that you had murdered anybody.
No.
So initially he was cooperative, I think, before he knew what they knew.
Right.
So they did catch him in some lies. They asked him initially if he had left. He was supposed to be on base in Arizona.
Right.
They asked him if he left the base. He initially completely denied leaving the base.
Right.
But then they're like, well, buddy, we've got this pesky stuff called security cameras.
Security cameras.
And do you not think that your base has security cameras? We're talking about the military.
Yeah.
Come on, buddy.
Yeah.
So then, of course, he admits to going to New Mexico.
I actually.
I did go to New Mexico.
I did go to New Mexico.
Now,
whoops, I forgot. I went to New Mexico.
So then, of course, the next question they asked him was, well, why did you go to New Mexico?
Right.
Gooch says he was checking church service times for Mennonite services.
Oh, so now he's in the military, and now he's like, oh, I think I want to now attend some Mennonite services.
Out of the blue. And for some odd reason, he felt the need to drive all the way to New Mexico to get those schedules, which is very strange.
Because there are no other Mennonites between there and there.
Right.
Whoa.
Right, and that's funny you say that, because something to note here, I have this in my notes, is that there are other Mennonite churches significantly closer to him.
Right. He just chose this particular lamp and light.
Right, and then of course the detective is like, well, 3 hours is a really long time to be inquiring about church schedules.
Yeah. Looking for a new church.
And
Let's try that one.
Yeah,
3 hours away.
Yeah. So when asked if Gooch was still a Mennonite, he says he respects the church but declined to be baptized, but then said he still wished to attend the church.
He wishes to attend the church but still remain a part of the military. You cannot do that.
Right. And of course they're like, well, that doesn't make sense, but okay,
All
buddy.
right. Alrighty then. Yeah.
He also became tearful when asked about his relationship with the Mennonite church. And then when they asked him if something in particular caused a falling out with the church, he was super vague, and he just basically said, I didn't really like it. I was happy to be out of it. And that was it. It was like...
He didn't like it, he was happy to be out of it, but he wants to go back to the point where I'm willing to drive 3 hours weekly to a church service. Okay, really makes a ton of sense. Yeah,
I mean, I guess he was 21 years old, so that's
right.
Really
He was young. He's like...
Thinks he can fool them.
Yeah.
Then they ask him, okay, well, what's the latest you got back to the Air Force Base? Because remember, he rolled in at 7 a.m.
Right.
He says, couldn't have been later than 1 or 2 a.m. Now, again, they've already told him they have surveillance. So he's lying again.
Right. Just
and
outright.
Then detectives say, well,
and he knows they know he's lying. That's the thing. He's got to know
Yeah.
So it's like, does he have a cognitive impairment?
I don't think he does.
Okay.
But the detectives then tell him, well, it was actually 7 a.m. you rolled in, not 1 or 2. And then he says, well, I fell asleep in my vehicle, so I probably just lost track of time.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
And then it's like, well, if you have nothing to hide, why do we keep catching you in lies?
Right.
So once detectives reveal that they have the security footage of, then of course the story continuously changes, as it
Yeah.
needs to for him to be able to
Try to
justify,
explain
yes.
this.
So then, of course, detectives then directly ask him if he was involved in Sasha Krause's homicide. He absolutely shows no emotion. So to me, if I didn't kill someone and I'm being asked if I did,
Right.
I would be like, absolutely not.
What are you
And
talking
I would probably
about?
be crying.
Yeah, I'd be
because
bawling.
yeah, because
the
you're like,
police service. I don't know what this is about.
right.
I've never heard of this person.
And there was nothing like that going on. He was just emotionless, and he said, "Sounds like I need a lawyer because you're trying to pin something on me." That was a
Oh.
quote from him.
Jeez.
So while he was being questioned at the station, they were executing search warrants for his vehicle, and in his vehicle they found binoculars in the glove box.
Okay. Well, maybe he's an avid bird watcher. You never know.
Could be. They found gloves in his trunk.
Okay.
That would explain the lack of DNA at the scene.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Which they kind of
Now, this is something that I find unbelievable. They found a receipt in his vehicle for a $220 car detailing service for the date after Sasha's body was found, when it was released to the media. So her body was found, and the public was notified that her body was found on February 22nd, 2020.
Right.
He had his car detailed on February 23rd, 2020.
So
And he
waited.
kept the receipt.
Yeah, in the vehicle?
Yes.
Wow, the man. He was clearly not
Or he just didn't think
criminal mastermind.
Or he just didn't think he was going to be caught because...
Right. Well, he must have, to the point where he had his vehicle detailed. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he must have thought they could put this on me. Well, then why not get rid of the receipt? Why not shred the receipt? Or throw it anywhere else.
And I think too, the
burn
fact
it.
They did intentionally call him for questioning and then execute the search warrant, so he didn't have time,
right,
to take anything out of his vehicle. But then to me, it's just like, you hear about that in so many cases. These
right,
idiots, and good thing they are idiots.
Right.
Keeping receipts.
I know.
And it's
like under the seat, in the glove, but yeah.
And it's like great evidence.
Right.
But it's like, wow.
Why?
You clearly did not.
Nowadays, I don't get a receipt. I don't want a receipt. Yeah, I get
usually
digital receipts. I don't keep my receipts for anything.
Yeah, and so, of course, they had a really good case. It was all pretty much circumstantial.
Right.
But to me, they always say that, but like, sometimes killers don't leave DNA.
Right.
That's just not always something that happens. So,
Right.
so I always hate it when there's this idea that there always has to be DNA.
Right. Well, right.
Because there
Sometimes
just isn't.
there can't be DNA because there isn't any.
And
so
I think of a strong circumstantial case that has multiple, like this one has, like 4 different things, can be just as overwhelming if there's enough of it.
Right. And it can be.
But there are jurors that don't care, that always want that.
Right.
Physical
the
evidence.
physical evidence. Sometimes there isn't any, and should people not be held accountable?
Just because they're smart enough not to leave DNA, that's absurd.
Right. That's idiotic. And think about the old days. There was no DNA.
Right.
Of any kind. Everything was
I guess there were
circumstantial.
fingerprints.
Right. But if they didn't
Hair,
have fingerprints or DNA.
Or blood typing.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, the odds of someone having the same blood type are pretty,
very
could happen
type
easily.
O positive is the most common blood type for anybody that doesn't know that. So
right.
there's a lot of
I'm saying there were a lot of circumstantial cases back in the day. I mean, we need to still hold people accountable, but I understand that the threshold then has to be higher for those cases with no physical
Right.
evidence.
And so, this case, they had the surveillance video, they had the cell phone data, they had the receipt for gas, or the credit card transaction for gas, and then they had the car detailing receipt. So it's like, it's not just one, when you look at reasonable doubt, is it
Right.
reasonable that that all these things are just coincidences? I don't think it is.
Right. No.
So
no. And I've seen people convicted on hardly any circumstance, and then they turn out to be wrongfully convicted. And this is not, one of those cases. This is
No.
like it could really.
This is a strong case.
It's a strong
It's
case.
about as strong as it gets with no physical evidence.
Yeah.
So at this point, there was enough probable cause to make his arrest.
Right.
After Gooch's arrest, investigators looked through his cell phone, of course, to try to get a better idea of his motive.
Right.
Because that's another thing that they really, even though they know he has like a generalized disdain for Mennonites, they don't really have like a clear motive, like why Sasha.
Why travel 3 hours
Right.
to find her?
So his cell phone or his text messages do paint a little bit more of a picture of his thought process. I still don't think it completely explains what was going on in his head, but can you ever really totally do that? I mean, I would say no.
I don't think so.
So Mark Gooch has two brothers, Samuel Gooch and Jacob Gooch. And it's interesting to note that Jacob Gooch actually became a state trooper.
Oh. A Mennonite state trooper.
And so clearly he was no longer a practicing Mennonite.
Right.
And Samuel Gooch went into the IT field, which apparently is another occupation that is not allowed within the Mennonite church.
Okay, so let me just get this straight. In the Mennonite church, I just want to get this straight in my head. You can have a cell phone and a computer, laptop type situation, but you cannot practice in the IT field. You cannot know anything about the maintenancing. I mean, we'd have to look a little, probably more into why that is, but that's interesting.
So Sasha Krause just had a flip phone.
Okay.
So I don't know what their stance is on computers, to be completely honest.
You didn't talk about computers,
Because
but cell phones.
Her phone maybe just was used for texting and calling.
Okay.
And not for any like online stuff.
But I don't understand IT, so you can't know about technology much about technology.
I did not look into that, but that's something maybe some of our listeners can let us know.
Let us know, why is that?
Yes.
I find that interesting. Okay.
So it's interesting. I think he had several siblings, so there may have been other siblings that were still in the church, but all three of these brothers had jobs that went against Mennonite beliefs. So when they're reviewing his text messages, they find this message. He was, interacting with his brother Jacob. And Jacob, again, was the state trooper.
Right.
So Jacob says in this text message, I gave a Mennonite a ticket, to which Mark Gooch responds, fuck yes, I hope you treated them like shit.
Oh,
And then Jacob says, I coughed on him so he would spread COVID at the wedding they're going to. And then
why did he have COVID while he's a trooper?
I don't know.
Jeez,
I don't know why.
He should be arrested just for that. Oh, I have COVID, and now I'm going to just go cough on everybody I give a ticket to.
And knowing they're going to a wedding.
Right. I mean, you should get arrested just for that.
And then Mark Gooch
so
responds, haha, that's hilarious.
Oh.
So then you're kind of getting this picture that his brother, it's like, okay, what does his brother know?
Right,
At this point, because clearly he's like surveilling Mennonites to kill at least one.
Right.
So according to these messages, his brother Jacob is aware that he's surveilling Mennonites on the days leading up to Sasha's murder. However, he doesn't tell him anything in the text messages where they can say that his brother knew specifically
100%
what he was going to do. You know, he
Okay.
never says like my plan is to murder them.
Right.
There's just no evidence of that.
Right.
Because he made a comment in one of the messages saying that, oh, this morning's surveillance was boring. It's like, well, how entertaining do you think it's going to be to watch Mennonites?
Mennonites.
Jeez.
Gee.
Yeah.
Oh. And was he driving to these this 3 hours away frequently?
You know, they didn't really say, but I would imagine he was going to like various ones on his downtime. So,
on his downtime? That's what I do in my downtime. I go to really? He's 21 years old.
I know.
You're supposed to be out,
Have fun.
living a little bit of the nightlife.
Right.
Not surveilling Mennonites. Jeez.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Based on the evidence, though, Gooch did plan in advance to specifically go to the Lamp and Light compound. I don't think he specifically knew he was going to encounter Sasha, because he had no reason to know that. But it was just a crime of opportunity once he got there. It was like, who can I, whoever he encountered alone, and, you know, she's a female.
Right.
He knows she's not going to resist.
Right.
So it sounds like from the evidence, when she was walking alone to get the music for the church services is when he saw her.
Which is the last time she was seen.
Yes. He abducted her and, put duct tape around her wrists, drove her to Sunset Crater, shot her in the back of the head. Again, no sexual motivation that, it was not a sexual crime. And then went back the next day, and no one knows why. Now, a few days after Gooch was arrested, a co-worker and friend of Mark Gooch contacted the police, and he tells the police that he has been holding a gun for Mark.
Oh. Because now he knows that people know, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And they actually got
So he didn't find it strange before that.
Well, exactly. You're like, really, dude? Like, my friend's asking me.
Can you just hold this gun for me?
Yeah.
No particular reason.
Oh, you're in jail for murder. That's interesting.
Now I should call the police and let them know.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
strange.
Okay.
But at least he did call. He could have just not called.
Right. That was nice of Mr.
Because then again, more evidence.
Whoever it was,
That's huge evidence.
That's
actually.
huge evidence, and so it's wonderful that he did that.
Because then you're starting to get like ballistic evidence, that is less circumstantial.
Right. So that's a great thing.
So they did collect this .22 caliber rifle from this friend, and they were able to match the bullet from Sasha's skull to that gun.
To the gun. Okay, good.
So
thank goodness.
There's really no doubts in this case at all. But however, Mark Gooch was unaware that the gun had been turned into the police by his friend.
Oh.
So Gooch makes a jailhouse call to his brother Samuel, asking him for his help. And he asks Samuel, he says, hey, my friend has this gun. Can you get that gun without him knowing? Like, he wanted to go in and take the gun.
Like, do some kind of a robbery or something.
Like, get the gun back.
Okay.
Samuel, who works in IT, this is the IT brother, was actually giving Mark Gooch advice on how to wipe his digital trail from prison. So, like, erase, Google Maps history, that type of thing. So the police, who are, like, intercepting these jailhouse calls, perform a sting operation to try to catch Samuel Gooch basically tampering with evidence.
Right. Like, what? These are being recorded.
Exactly.
Why?
I know.
Okay.
Do you think they just don't listen to him or something?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah. So the police actually planted a similar gun on that friend's property.
Oh.
As part of this sting operation. And as soon as Samuel Gooch takes the gun, even though it's a plant, they are able to arrest him for evidence tampering, which can carry a sentence of up to 3 years in prison.
Right.
But they do say, hey, if you testify against your brother, we will drop these charges. Because, he's going to lose his job, and among everything else.
Right.
And so he actually agrees
Of course he does.
to that.
That'd be pretty ridiculous not to at that point. An IT guy stealing properties, burglarizing properties. Okay. Yes.
It's not gonna start over if I stop, is it?
Wow.
Anyhow, so 19 months after his arrest, I'm missing a page, but I'm just gonna wing it here. He, Mark Gooch is convicted of the murder of Sasha Krause, and he is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Well, that's stealing a gun.
So, now that they have the brother willing to testify against Mark Gooch, Mark Gooch ends up going to trial 19 months after his arrest, and he is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And something I found to be extremely terrible is, there's a quote from Mark Gooch from within, or from the trial, and he made a statement. And it was striking to me how it lacked any accountability. Not that you should be surprised. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that a guy like that wouldn't be accountable.
No, because he's got to be a psychopath.
Yes. I would think so.
With the way he stalked them out and...
So, his quote this is his, Mark Gooch's statement from court. It says, "Firstly, I'd like to express my sincere condolences to the deceased's family. And also, I'd like to express my thankfulness for the love and support for my own family in this difficult situation." This is not a situation,
Right.
Mark.
No.
Sir.
It's a situation he created.
This is from your actions, and in no way do you acknowledge that you caused this, and you refer to Sasha as the deceased?
Right.
I mean, and then you're thanking your own family, like,
And he's expressing condolences.
he should just get bent and not say anything.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned.
Would have been better off just keeping his trap shut.
Yes. And the judge made a comment that this was the most senseless murder she had ever presided over, which is something that I found to be very striking, because, I mean, other than, like, you had mentioned, I can't remember if it was before or after we had started recording the podcast, but that it seemed like a hate crime. And I really agree with that. It's almost like someone targeting a random person of another race simply because they had a bad experience with someone of that race.
Right. It's similar to that type of situation. Though, I mean, this is kind of out there. It's almost like it is kind of a religious hate crime, but it's of a religion you grew up in. That's what's so different about it.
That is different.
And it has one victim, whereas usually most of the time religious type hate crime murders are multiple victims.
It could have been he was on a path, like, if he had gotten away with this, that's another thing. If it wasn't for the cell phone stuff, with the way that they did that, he would have gotten away with this, and he probably thought, well, I don't know this girl. They're never going to ever suspect me, and he probably never thought they would do, like, a reverse cell phone tracking thing.
Yeah.
And it's just, like, if he had decided not to bring his cell phone, he would have never been caught.
No,
Ever.
exactly. And so this is one where if he had been a little more criminally adept,
Yes.
he could have gotten away with multiple murders before anybody caught on.
Yes. That is...
If he had not used his cell phone, during that time period, or if he would have, there were so many things that they did in this case that were particularly genius. Like they really did a good job at putting the
Yeah,
circumstantial
I can
evidence together.
say, and in the future, I may not always say this about law enforcement, but I really have no issue with anything in regards to how this was handled.
No,
And-
this was definitely one of the more
They
really savvy cases, which is interesting because it's such a remote area. You
Right.
think this would be like an inner city police unit that would have this type of technology and these type of ways to go about solving it, but no, leave it to rural New Mexico.
So, yeah, they did a really good job.
Really good job. Yes.
So, I think that about sums up. That's the murder of Sasha Krause, and
Yes.
yeah,
Well, yeah, no, that's
welcome to Bleak. I hope you guys liked it. If you have any
Yes.
constructive criticism, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, let us know. We love constructive criticism. Don't be an asshole. That's
true,
that's
too.
what I have to say about that.
Yeah. I mean,
you
at
know.
least they can't comment on our looks.
Right?
Not that we aren't incredible looking.
Well,
but-
we are. I don't know. To each his own opinion, but we have between us had 7 children.
Yes.
So I don't know. So. Anyways, well, thank you so
Well,
much
on
for
that-
tuning in.
yes.
We hope that you listen again as we fine tune our podcast and go along.
And
here.
we're hoping you eventually will want to become a bleakazoid.
A bleakazoid. I think bleak freak.
Or a bleak freak.
We'll
You
have
can
to
let
see.
us know what you prefer
Yeah,
about that as
bleak
well.
Freak, bleakazoid.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we will hopefully be back next week. We're going to try to post weekly.
Yep.
Uh,
Weekly-ish. We have 7 kids. Keep this in mind. Of all ages. Our kids are age 1 to 23.
Yes,
I
and
had to
all
think
but
about
in
this.
between.
And in between, yes.
Yes.
So,
And I think there are, what is it? 4 girls, 4 boys, 4 girls and 3 boys?
4 girls, 3 boys.
Yes.
Yep, pretty split.
Anyhow, well, you'll kind of get little nuggets
Yeah.
here and there, but you may already
Yeah.
know us, and that might be why you're listening. So you're like,
Yeah.
yes, I already know this information. But anyways, have a wonderful rest of your day, and
Have a great week.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.